And with the last pick of the draft, Monday Night Raw selects the SportsZu. Well, it's better than not getting drafted. Previously on the SportsZu and Doktor O'Kay. Are you kidding? This isn't even about sports. Why are you talking about a movie from 2003? What? You think you can do better? You just watch TV and then talk about it. A journey soon begins, its prize reflected in another's eyes. When you see is what you lack, then selfish love will change you back. Whatever. What did you do? The King and Queen of the Ring tournaments march on. Are you sure this is right? It doesn't feel right to me. Do we really need to do records for every single match? Wait a minute, you want me to do all that? No. That's crazy. Of course it was okay. Wait, what? That was the wrong answer. Well, geez, you must be awfully proud of Awesome Truth right now. He is like a bazillion time 24/7 champion, so maybe he's the greatest of all time. Now let's go to everyone's favorite segment. I said we weren't doing that this week. I'm not doing it 2 times in a row. The WWE... Wait, what? Really? Okay. The WWE goes up against the NFL Draft, doesn't have enough brand switches, and is just generally boring. Today, we're going to fix it. Oh! Welcome to the SportsZu. Zoo Crew, welcome back. We've got an exciting video today about the WWE Draft. And after being challenged on Doktor O'Kay, the doc himself really stepped up and helped out a ton with this video. So let's get to it. We'll start with the origin of professional sports drafts. Okay, so first, the NFL was the first league to have an amateur draft prior to the start of a new season. The very first draft was on February 8th, 1936. And then it was followed decades later by the other 3 major professional sports. First, the NBA, which at the time was known as the Basketball Association of America, on July 1st, 1947. The NHL on June 5th, 1963. And finally, Major League Baseball on June 8th and 9th, 1965. Now, the MLB did have a draft before that, but it was only to draft minor leaguers onto major league teams, and that was known as the Rule 5 draft, or originally as the selection of players, all the way back in 1892. Wow. So in this particular draft, the major league teams were able to draft minor league players who met certain conditions for a fee. But they were required to be with the major league teams for an entire season, or they would be subject to being returned to the minor league team for a reduced fee, about half of the original fee. So let's talk a little bit more about the first NFL draft. It was held at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia all the way back in 1936. It was created to end bidding wars amongst the teams for amateur players. It was decided that the last place team from the prior season would select first, and then so forth all the way to the championship team selecting last. In this particular draft, there were 9 teams in the league and 9 rounds of selections for 81 total picks. In this first draft, the Philadelphia Eagles selected Jay Berwanger, a halfback out of the University of Chicago, as the first ever NFL draft selectee. He was also the first winner of the Heisman Trophy in 1935, which was then known as the Downtown Athletic Club Trophy. He demanded $1,000 per game of the salary. So, because the Eagles didn't think they could sign him at that rate, traded his player rights to the Chicago Bears. Berwanger's final offer was $1,500 apart from that of the Bears, $15,000 versus $13,500. So he never played in the NFL. Instead, he took a job with a Chicago rubber company. But that was not the end of his athletic pursuits. He tried out but missed the U.S. Olympic team in the decathlon for the 1936 Olympics. But he then went on to a rugby career and won a national championship with the team from Chicago and was eventually inducted into the Rugby Hall of Fame in 2016. Many decades before that, he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1954. The second pick of that draft by the Boston Redskins was Riley Smith, a quarterback from Alabama. He played 3 seasons for Boston and Washington as the Boston team moved to D.C. after 1936, but an injury ended his career prematurely. He was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1985 and was the first ever draft selection to actually play a game in the NFL. The third pick was by the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the player's name was Bill Shakespeare, a halfback from Notre Dame? Are you sure we're not talking about baseball here? And could he really have the same name? What, was he called the Bard of South Bend or something like that? Oh, really? Huh. Well, that's a coincidence, huh? So the Pittsburgh Pirates, soon to be the Pittsburgh Steelers, drafted Bill Shakespeare with the third pick. And he threw a game-winning touchdown pass with just 32 seconds left to complete a 13-0 fourth quarter comeback win against Ohio State in what was then declared the game of the century. He also never played in the NFL like Berwanger and instead decided to work for the Cincinnati Rubber Company, and he eventually worked his way up to president in 1960. He was also inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1983. Lastly, we're going a little out of order, but we want to talk about the number 6 pick of the Chicago Bears, Joe Stidehar, a tackle from West Virginia. He was the first lineman selected in an NFL draft and was also the first player drafted to make the NFL Hall of Fame, being inducted in 1967. And in fact, 4 players from this very first draft made the Hall of Fame. He played 9 years with the Bears, being named a first-team All-Pro 5 times and winning 5 division titles and 3 NFL championships. He was also elected into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1972. We also want to talk about the media rights for these drafts, as they have become very popular. The NFL Draft first was shown on TV in 1980 when ESPN president Chet Simmons asked the NFL if they could broadcast the draft, and the NFL commissioner at the time, Pete Rozelle, reluctantly agreed. A few years later, the draft was moved from weekdays to weekends to boost viewership, and it later moved from a 2-day format to a 3-day format in 2010 to again get more viewers. ESPN and ABC aired different versions for the first 2 days of the draft and then have a simulcast on the 3rd day, while the NFL Network separately airs its own version. The NBA followed right after the NFL's success by also airing its draft in 1980 on the USA Network. The NHL kind of got into the party when they first allowed the public to attend the event in 1980, but it was not first aired on TV until 1984 in Canada, and then in 1989 in the US. The Major League Baseball draft, however, was not televised until 2007 on ESPN2. Okay, come on now. This is getting ridiculous. How much longer are we going to talk about these other sports? Can we just get to the WWE already? Okay, fine, let's go. The NFL used many venues over the years, but it really used Radio City Music Hall the most in the 2000s. After the league had an issue with the Radio City Music Hall, it decided to start rotating hosts from the league's teams and their cities. Chicago was the first host, drawing over 200,000 visitors in 2015. Nashville achieved an amazing 600,000 fans in 2019, which was just eclipsed this year by Detroit, when they had over 700,000 fans across the 3 days. WWE came into drafts much later than these 4 professional sports, after SmackDown became its second flagship program on August 26, 1999, when Triple H unfortunately defeated the People's Champion, The Rock, to retain the WWF Championship in that night's main event. After defeating the WCW in the Monday Night War in 2001, the WWF acquired the rights to WCW's assets for around $7 million, essentially doubling the WWF's roster size. The brand extension, or more commonly known as a brand split, began on March 25, 2002, with the first ever WWE Draft taking place on Monday Night Raw, which took effect on April 1st. So, Shane McMahon and Stephanie McMahon bought WCW, but they were not going to stop there and wanted full control of the WWF as well. To accomplish the purchase, they sold their 50% share in the WWF to Ric Flair so that they could buy WCW. However, the WCW lost to the WWF at Survivor Series, and Vince McMahon then got full control of the WWF. However, it was revealed that Ric Flair had purchased all of Shane and Stephanie's stock in WWF, and therefore he and Vince became 50% partners. The WWF's board of directors decided that Flair would then exclusively run Monday Night Raw, while Vince would exclusively run SmackDown. Therefore, they needed to split the brands up evenly by holding the first ever WWF Draft. SmackDown won the coin toss and had the right to select first. But prior to the draft, there were a couple of rules, such as Linda McMahon declaring that Stone Cold Steve Austin was a free agent and would not be selected by either brand. At the time, Triple H and Jazz were the undisputed WWF champion and the WWF Women's Champion, respectively, and therefore they were going to represent both brands. Chris Jericho also had a championship match against Triple H on the night of the draft, so he was not allowed to be selected during Raw for that portion of the draft. After the show, because he lost the championship match, he was then placed into the lottery and was selected by SmackDown after the show. Stephanie McMahon likewise had a championship match the night of the draft, so she also could not be selected during the show. However, she was under the stipulation that if she lost, she was going to be forced to leave the company. And in fact, she did, so she was gone. So after SmackDown had the first pick, the brands would alternate selecting each superstar. Picks 1 through 20 were made live on Monday Night Raw, and the remaining picks were conducted via a lottery on WWF's website. Now, a total of 60 individuals ended up being selected through 57 different picks, as the NWO, which at the time was Hall, Nash, and X-Pac, as well as the current tag team champions, Billy and Chuck, were both selected as a group instead of individually. In the results of the very first draft, you can see The Rock was the first ever draft pick in WWF history. And then The Undertaker was the first round pick for Raw. And here you can see all 20 picks that were shown on Raw itself. The WWF had many subsequent drafts with various changes over the years. After the 2002 draft, there was no draft in 2003, but the next one came around in 2004 when each general manager selected 6 people randomly during Raw. You can see in the background there is just one of those lottery shakers that had the names on balls. And then afterwards, the general managers were allowed to make trades up until midnight on the night of the draft in order to shuffle the rosters even more. In 2005, 1 or 2 people were selected randomly during each show for 4 weeks. And then at the very end of the 4 weeks, there was an 11-person trade to end the lottery. And this 2005 draft was the first time that champions were able to bring titles to new shows if they were selected. In 2006, we saw another format change, which was just the ECW draft. The WWE brought back the ECW in 2006. So to help boost its roster, the ECW was allowed to select one superstar from each brand. But there was no full-scale draft that year. In 2007, the draft included all 3 brands, with winners of matches earning draft picks for that brand. Selections, however, continued to be determined randomly. In 2008 and 2009, the draft were held in the exact same manner. By 2010, again it was the same, but the ECW had been disbanded by Vince McMahon, so we were down to just 2 brands making selections. And finally, in 2011, it had the same format with just 2 brands as in 2010. Oh wow, I can really remember that 2011 draft. That draft was great. It had the greatest of all time, John Cena, having been the very first random pick going from Raw to SmackDown, and then he wrestled in the main event of that night, a 6-man tag match, but he lost. So Raw got the final random draft selection, and he ended up being the one getting drafted. Amazing. So he went from Raw to SmackDown, then wrestled for SmackDown, and then drafted back to Raw, all in one night. Amazing. He truly is the greatest of all time. And wow, going through all these, I can really see how much effort you put into all of this. I just can't believe all the research that you did. It's amazing. You put in so much work for this project. These PowerPoints, man, looking at these, reading off them, they are not as easy as they look. So I have to say, I really, really appreciate all the work that you've done here, and I wish for nothing but the best. Wow, I really appreciate it. That is so nice of you. And I have to say, it is not easy for you to have all those different segments every week. And what were you thinking? Are you kidding me? That is amazing. You could really get hurt doing that. It's really great for you to put your body on the line like that just to have a good product. I never knew how much work it took after just watching 2 different TV shows in a week. What I'm trying to say is that we can all make just a little more room for both of us on the SportsZu. And I really just wanted to let you know that. And I am so psyched to be here. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Doc, welcome to the family. Bring it in here, man. I love you. All right, get out of here. I'll finish this on my own. I got this. All right, so where were we? Let's get back to it after that crazy earthquake. Ah yes, 2016. So the 2011 draft was the last one for 5 years, but the brand split was reinstituted in 2016 with SmackDown becoming a live show and airing on the USA Network. In that draft, in each round, the brands would make alternating picks, with Raw selecting first in each round and making 3 selections, while SmackDown would only make 2 selections. Tag teams counted as 1 pick unless the brand, for some reason, did not want both members. 6 selections had to be made from the developmental program NXT. And there were 6 rounds or 30 total picks that were airing on TV. Now, the same format stayed off air for round 7, but in rounds 8 through 11, each brand made 3 selections per round for a total of 59 picks that night. Then in 2017, we switched from a true draft to what they called a superstar shakeup. In this format, deals were made behind the scenes with individuals appearing on their new brands on the April 10th and 11th episodes of Raw and SmackDown, where 26 total people change brands. And in this version, NXT was not officially included. Same format stayed for both 2018 and 2019. But in 2019, SmackDown moved to Fox later in the year, so a second draft was held on SmackDown's second episode on Fox. This draft was held over 2 nights instead of just 1 night and had very similar rules to the 2016 draft. Wrestlers were placed into one of 2 pools, seemingly randomly, and any undrafted wrestlers became free agents. In addition to NXT wrestlers also become available, 205 Live superstars were also eligible to be selected. Now 205 Live has been discontinued, but this was a program in which wrestlers could only be 205 pounds or less, and they challenged for the Cruiserweight Championship. There were 4 rounds in this particular draft, with 20 total picks airing on SmackDown. The WWE's website then announced 8 additional picks as supplemental picks that were not selected from the first pool on SmackDown. But 5 of the 8 picks in the supplemental rounds went to SmackDown. Then on night 2, there were 6 rounds shown on Raw for a total of 30 picks. There were also 10 additional supplemental picks that were made afterward, with each brand getting 5 picks. In this draft, we also had Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross traded to Raw for future draft pick considerations the very next night, but no such consideration was ever announced. That was the only trade that happened around the same time as the draft. In 2020, we had the exact same format as in 2019, but in 2021, the draft pools were not announced in advance, which was very strange. You really had no idea who could get picked in the 2021 draft. The draft was held on October 1st and 4th, but did not take effect until October 22nd. In this draft, each brand had 2 picks per round, eliminating the 2-3 format, instead going with 2 and 2 per round. SmackDown had the first pick on night 1, and Raw had the first pick on night 2. In 2023, after skipping 2022, the draft moved back to its traditional post-WrestleMania time frame in April. The draft pools were again announced prior to the draft, otherwise it was the same as in 2021. And our most recent draft, just completed in April of 2024, was the same as 2023, except that all champions, except for the women's tag team champions who go to both brands, were ineligible to be drafted. And apparently, Paul Heyman could just take Roman Reigns out of the draft pool, which was pretty controversial, but what can you say? It's Roman Reigns. So, what does this all lead us to? We have had many issues with the current draft format, and you can see that the doc and I listed all of them out here that we could think of right here on this page, but we'll get into each of them in detail here. So, let's start out with the first 2 issues. 1, it is way too long to get to the next WrestleMania. It was absolutely ridiculous for Rhea Ripley as the new champion to go to Raw after WrestleMania in 2023 and have Becky Lynch on that brand with her for the entire year, for them never to battle each other for the championship until WrestleMania. Rhea had 9 total title defenses from the WrestleMania in April of 2023 to the WrestleMania in April of 2024. We're going to read them off here because it was just that ridiculous. Rhea battled the following for the title: Zelina Vega, Natalya twice, Raquel Rodriguez twice, a fatal 5-way match with Nia Jax, Raquel Rodriguez, Shayna Baszler, and Zoe Stark. Zoe Stark again in a one-on-one match, and Ivy Nile in her very first one-on-one match on the main roster. And then lastly, Nia Jax in Australia. All these title defenses and not one for Becky Lynch until she had to win the Elimination Chamber in the very final PLE before WrestleMania 40. Becky went 11-3-1 one-on-one matches after WrestleMania 39 until that Elimination Chamber match, but somehow did not earn a title match until winning the Chamber. Secondly, the draft is held at the same time as the NFL draft. Literally, both drafts were happening at the exact same time on Friday night. The WWE's on SmackDown and the NFL's on ESPN, ABC, and the NFL Network, as stated earlier. Now on SmackDown on April 26, 2024, there were 2.143 million viewers and a .58 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic, which was an 8% drop from the 2.333 million viewers and a .63 rating the prior week. This represented not just the lowest numbers on SmackDown all year, but also the biggest year-over-year decline, down 13.3% in total viewership and 13.4% in the 18 to 49 demo. In comparison, the NFL draft, which is night 2 of the NFL draft, being rounds 2 and 3, drew a combined 5.050 million viewers and a 1.37 rating in that 18 to 49 demo between the three networks. Now, the NBA playoffs were also going on at the same time, and in those two games that aired during SmackDown, at least some point, we had Milwaukee at Indiana, which was a 5:30 p.m. Eastern start. It drew a 2.169 million viewers with a .73 rating, and the LA Clippers in Dallas had an 8 p.m. Eastern start that drew 3.42 million and a 1.17 rating. Conversely, the last time the WWE Draft was held in the fall was on the October 4th, 2021 Monday Night Raw, which of course goes up against the NFL's Monday Night Football. But when the WWE did this, it still had its highest ratings for the entire football season at 1.857 million due to the draft. So all of the other drafts get out of the way in spring to summer. That left a whole lot of time between those pro sports drafts to a fall draft for the WWE, which made it a more novel concept at the time. So even though it was going up against Monday Night Football, due to the change of seeing different type of programming for the WWE, it still had a higher rating than normal on that particular Monday night. But when it ran up against the NFL draft, it had a much lower rating than other nearby SmackDowns. So how do we fix this? This sounds fairly easy. Let's start with moving the draft to the first SmackDown and the second Raw following Survivor Series. Survivor Series is one of the big 4 premium live events each year for the WWE, but it has the least stakes, with the main matches being either a traditional 4-on-4 or 5-on-5 Survivor Series match, or the more recent version being a War Games match, one each for the men and one for the women. Now, Survivor Series typically is the weekend of Thanksgiving, so that Saturday or Sunday is when you will see Survivor Series. So, what fixes are we going to make to this particular draft? So, to put stakes on Survivor Series, what are we going to do and tie it into the draft to make both events more exciting? First, we will give the winning brand the right to pick first in that particular draft based on the outcome of the traditional or War Games match. Secondly, the participants on the winning teams will also get a benefit in that they will get to challenge each other over the following weeks to be the next #1 contender for the WWE or World Championships on whichever brand that they end up getting drafted to on either the next premium live event, should there be one in December, or on the Day 1 or New Year's Revolution versions of Raw and SmackDown. This, having stakes In addition, it also provides one final opportunity for the superstars to impress their general managers and bump up their draft stocks. It also provides a way to end and begin new rivalries with teammates or opponents in this particular match, as there will be a new mixture of participants on either brand, and they can have some sort of interactions to either begin or end those new rivalries. But in addition to these Survivor Series matches, this will now be the new location of Champion v Champion matches. So those have traditionally been held on either Night of Champions or Clash of Champions over the years, and most recently we had Night of Champions returning on a one-time basis on May 27th, 2023 as one of the two Saudi Arabia. This year we're having the King and Queen of the Ring PLE happen in Night of Champions place. So there is no scheduled dedicated PLE for champion versus champion matches. So we can make Survivor Series the new place for this. And why would we do that? The winners of these matches will get to select which brand they want to go to after seeing the results of the draft. So in 2024, we just saw that the champions were excluded from the drafts, and that was actually a pretty good idea. One, because the titles have just been named either the WWE Championships on SmackDown or the World Championships on Raw. So if we have some switching brands and others not, that really is going to mess with things. So going forward, they should stay on the same brand. But also, it was pretty much a guarantee that, say, the Intercontinental Champion was drafted to SmackDown, we would know then that the US Champion would likely go to Raw. Because the Champion v Champion matches, likewise, like Survivor Series matches, don't really have stakes to them, by placing them here and having them tied to the draft, we're now having those matches also mean more than normal. Secondly, this also helps with WrestleMania plans. So let's go right back to that Rhea Ripley and Becky Lynch example. It was pretty well known for the entire year that WWE was leaning towards having those two square off at WrestleMania. So we had to do a little dance to somehow have them avoid each other for an entire year. Now you don't have to do that. You simply have these two coming together in December, and so they're only on the same brand for a few months. It is much easier for them not to square off in a matter of months prior to WrestleMania. This just makes so much more sense. On top of that, we had a few WrestleMania matches where the opponents were not even on the same brand. How did they get to participate in these matches if they're not even facing each other? For example, we had Jimmy Uso and the Bloodline going to Raw every week to tamper with and mess with Jey Uso so that we could somehow come to a conclusion that Jey and Jimmy should have a match at WrestleMania. Then at the very last minute, we had Dominic Mysterio all of a sudden helping Legado del Fantasma just so we could get another Rey versus Dominic match at WrestleMania. We didn't need to see that, but somehow they came together yet again, this time for a tag match between the LWO and Santos Escobar representing Legado del Fantasma with Dominic Mysterio. Our next issue is the draft pools are always awkward assortments. I guess they're supposed to be random. This time it was pointed out that in night one there was a great deal many more SmackDown performers and only a few Raw performers that were in this particular draft pool. Maybe that was random, but who knows? It's just always strange to see how they decide who's in a pool and who's not. It really messes with who should be available. Maybe they should have all the SmackDown superstars on night one and all the Raw superstars in night two. But we're not going to do that. We're going to make a full change here. So night one of the draft will be on SmackDown, and it will be an all women's draft. Because there are less women on the WWE roster than men, it just makes more sense to have the shorter show, with SmackDown being only 2 hours and Raw being 3 hours, to have all the women in the first night's draft. It also gives the women the sole spotlight to themselves without trying to compare how they are drafted when they're in the same pool as the men. So again, the Women's Survivor Series or War Games match, the winner of that brand will get the first pick. We've had SmackDown getting the first pick on SmackDown's night of the draft, but that is gone. It will now be the winner of the Women's Survivor Series match. Then, finally, the final segment at near the end of the draft, the winning champion, at least, maybe the losing champion as well, but at least the winning champion will come out to the middle of the ring and they will declare which brand they will be fighting on for the next year until the next draft. Then on night 2, we will have the same format and it will be an all men's draft with the winning champion from Survivor Series coming out in the final segment and declaring which brand he will be on. But before that, since we also have the Intercontinental titles and US title, we will have the winner of that champion v champion match come out either at the same time or sometime earlier in the night to do the same. And should the tag team titles for the men's side be split apart like they are now, but weren't at the time of last Survivor Series, we will have the same thing and they will also have their own segment to declare which brand that they will go to. Our next issues, we're going to lump these all into one big group. First, the alternating pattern of 2 and 2 picks per round, or the even more awkward 3 and 2 picks was just a strange thing to do. This was just too different from pro sports. In pro sports, you just get one pick at a round and it just goes until everyone is done drafting in that round. Now, of course, you see plenty of trades in the pro sports, which is great. We'll get back to trades in a little bit, but you obviously can get more than one pick in a round if these trades have been made. But in these previous WWE drafts, you had 4 picks or 5 picks going on in a round. It was just very awkward that one person said Raw's pick, then someone said SmackDown's pick, and someone said Raw's pick, which obviously meant these decisions had already been made, and then the same for SmackDown, and then in those earlier drafts, the same for Raw again. It was just very, very strange. Secondly, there were insane drops in where people are drafted, and also sometimes ridiculous rises in drafted. I know the doc talked a lot about Carmelo Hayes being drafted way too early, but let's focus on a big drop this year. It was Drew McIntyre. He had been chasing the World Heavyweight Championship for months, and he even had a great 8-4 record in 2024, which I know Doc cared a lot about, and he even won the championship at WrestleMania. Of course, he only held on to that championship for just over 5 minutes when Damian Priest cashed in on him. But still, he had just won the championship. And of those 4 losses, his only losses were in an earlier championship match on day 1, in the Royal Rumble match itself, which is the hardest match to win every year, and a Money in the Bank cash-in by Priest that we just talked about, and finally a fatal 4-way match, also a harder match to win, the very next night. So he had a really tough go of things to even have those 4 losses. And on top of that, with both Seth Rollins being injured and taking time off coming out of WrestleMania, and CM Punk still being injured from the Royal Rumble, McIntyre was arguably the #1 superstar on all of Raw post WrestleMania. But he somehow went as the 11th overall pick, which was the 3rd round in Pool 2, behind the likes of Jade Cargill, who had only 4 total WWE matches at the time, CM Punk, who, as we just said, was injured and was in 1 match in the last decade, Braun Strowman, who had not yet even returned to Monday Night Raw and was out for an entire year, and Tiffany Stratton, who was doing quite well, but was only on the main roster for 3 months. So it just made no sense for Drew McIntyre to be that far down the list. Now, admittedly, the draft, it needs to be worked around a little bit to get everyone where you want them to go, but it was just a really bad order in the way they did it. Thirdly, in this group, how to value and draft factions appropriately with 3 to 6 people picked at once is just so difficult. So how good is a faction? The LWO has a Hall of Famer in Rey Mysterio in it, but the rest of the group is maybe not so successful. But then on the other hand, you see the Judgment Day, and they have been the overwhelming force on Raw for an entire year. On the other side, you have the Bloodline, and they were the dominant faction on SmackDown for an entire year. But the Judgment Day suddenly had Damian Priest not a part of the group because he was champion, and Rhea Ripley not a part of the group because she was injured. So you were left with Finn Balor, JD McDonough, and Dominic Mysterio. So how good was that group? And then on the Bloodline side, Roman Reigns was just pulled out of it by Paul Heyman, so you were left with Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga, who had just joined the group 1 week earlier when they injured Jimmy Uso and booted him out. So where did that leave these two groups? In the end, the Judgment Day was picked 13th, which was the 4th round, and the Bloodline was picked 11th, which was the 3rd round. So it's just so hard to figure out where to place people when there are just multiple people within a group. Next in the same group, it is awkward to break up tag teams. Now we haven't seen this as much of late, but the best example in recent memory was in the 2001 draft, where Raw inexplicably only selected Big E with its first pick of the draft, which was 2nd overall on night 1 of the draft. But they could have just selected Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods as well. Why would you not want one of the best tag teams of all time to stay together if you can? It just made no sense. We want Big E only. We don't need Kofi Kingston. We don't need Xavier Woods. Let's just get Big E only. No, that makes no sense. You want all 3 of them. They are all Hall of Famers. They're some of the best of all time. And that was just the most confounding thing I think all of us have ever seen. Fortunately, that hasn't happened as much in recent years, but I bet if we go long enough, it certainly will keep happening. And lastly, in this group, lack of trades. This is one of the key features of NFL, NBA, and NHL drafts to keep viewers interested and tune in the whole time. When something just comes out spontaneously that you weren't expecting, it just is so much more exciting. In the 2024 NFL Draft, there were 5 trades in round 1 alone. And then, night 2, which we said was rounds 2 and 3, there were 11 more trades. Yes, you want to tune in when these trades happen. This is some of the most exciting times of the draft to see these trades. So why is WWE not doing trades during the draft? So let's fix all of these issues right now. This is going to take multiple pages to explain this all. First, the draft will switch from an alternating selection to a snake format. In such a draft, the team or brand that selects first in the first round then selects last in the second round, and so on and so forth. So let's say Raw has the first pick, SmackDown will have the 2nd and 3rd pick, Raw will have the 4th and 5th pick, SmackDown will be 6th and 7th, Raw 8th and 9th, and just keep alternating like that, 2 picks in a row every time after the first round. This particular format is standard in fantasy sports, which we talked about just a few videos ago. So please go back and watch that one if you haven't yet. And they are played by over 50.4 million Americans alone as of 2022. So this concept is not a novel concept. Many people and WWE viewers will be very familiar with this concept. With large rosters, this format keeps drafting manageable while also maintaining some realism. Now we talked about the format of going back and forth with 2 picks. So when you select 2 wrestlers at once, it will reduce the number of times that picks need to be announced. So when you see an NFL draft, you really have to have 1 draft at a time, then you have another 8 minutes in between or whatever amount of time depending on the round, then you have 1 pick. Here you don't have that. This means less times up for someone to announce a pick. Based on the number of eligible draftees, selections will be announced every so many minutes, depending on the number of wrestlers to be selected, with a countdown clock appearing on the screen in the same way as shown on TV in pro sports drafts. Now, one thing WWE does well is have guest pick announcers, and they can still be used here, but we recommend changing that up to either have one guest announcer per brand or just have one guest announcer for the entire time. Nonetheless, we would have up to 10 guest announcers for this format. So that's still plenty of time to get those legends to come back and get that pop out of the crowd. Also, everyone is drafted individually. There are no tag teams, no factions, no one is drafted as a group of any way. Here, if you want to keep a team together, you have 2 straight picks to easily do it. This is the best way to keep a tag team together. You just pick them both as both of your picks. If for some reason you want to split up a tag team, you just take one of them as, say, your second pick in your back-to-back picks, and then the other brand immediately swoops in and takes them. Why would you not pick 2 in a row? Well, maybe one tag team member is doing a lot better than the other one at the moment. Say we have the Street Profits. Montez Ford is on fire right now. He's won a whole bunch of single matches in addition to the tag team matches. But Angelo Dawkins hasn't won a singles match since 2022, so one brand thinks they can hold off and select him several rounds later. So we'll see how that works out. Spoiler alert there. If a brand really wants to keep a team or faction together, they're allowed to make trades during the draft. Just like we talked about, if for some reason Angelo Dawkins gets taken in by the other brand, you can make a trade for some other draft picks or other superstars to get him back. And then similarly, you don't have to have the better superstars slip in the draft just to keep them in line with what brand you want them to be on. You just have to select them in the appropriate spot and then make a trade to get them where you want to be. And we can say that Drew McIntyre might be the perfect person to take a look at that in a little bit. Next, however, we still need to take into account the disparity in the length of the shows such that Raw will still need to have more wrestlers. So, in 2019 and 2020, this was achieved by Raw getting the 3 picks and SmackDown only getting 2 picks in each round. And as we talked about, that was really frustrating, really terrible at the time, right off the top of the draft to have that happen. It really seemed like Raw had a clear advantage at the very beginning of each draft. Since 2021, only the supplemental picks have been the way to fill out the rosters evenly. This is fine, but we have a way that we think this can be done better. Next, and how will we do these things? First, except for the ineligible champions, as was just done in the most recent draft, and for the superstars with long-term injuries or absences, all wrestlers will be selected on TV. We've not had that. We've had those supplemental picks in recent years, and this year, for example, Baron Corbin was drafted to be a main roster call-up, and it really had a chance to show that he had gone back down to NXT, put in some great work, and was now ready to come back to the main roster. Instead, he wasn't even drafted in the main rounds on TV. He was just a supplemental pick, and his recall to the big leagues was not even shown or given the shrift it deserved. Secondly, similar to the 2019 and 20 drafts, what we're going to do here is after we get about 2/3 of the way through the draft, we will then have the remaining rounds have Raw select 2 superstars per round, while SmackDown will still only make 1 selection per round. Therefore, in the snake format, Raw will get to make 4 picks at once, while SmackDown will only get 2 picks at once. Again, having 4 picks in a bundle will reduce the number of times someone will have to go onto the stage to announce the picks. Next, and lastly, after WrestleMania is the perfect time to make some in-season trades to freshen things up even more. We talked a little bit about the LWO and Legado del Fantasma. Let's talk about them a little bit more. So, they were fighting since right after Crown Jewel, when Rey Mysterio lost his US title to Logan Paul. In that match, it was shown that Santos Escobar was actually helping Logan Paul by putting brass knuckles onto the apron. Paul picked them up, used them on Rey, and won the championship. That he still holds as of right now. So these 2 factions then fought each other all the way up through and into WrestleMania when Rey Mysterio and Andrade, who was not even on SmackDown, faced off against Santos Escobar and Dominic Mysterio, who was also not even on SmackDown. So that easily could have been fixed here. We could have had some trades to get everyone on the right brand, either before WrestleMania or after WrestleMania. This feud is finally over. We can have one of the two factions getting traded to the other brand for anyone else as compensation. And so the feud ends without them just deciding to part ways. So right now, that was done via the draft in April 2024. But here, because everyone loves trades, no matter when throughout the year, sometimes those are the biggest deal during the season in pro sports, that we're going to bring that to the WWE as well a lot more. And one of those factions is going to get shipped to the other brand via trade. All right, our next group of issues. First, the lack of clarity on NXT picks. Perhaps the best part of the current draft is that we get to see the reactions of surprised NXT superstars at the Performance Center right after they get drafted on either Raw or SmackDown. However, even this format is imperfect, as we just talked about, like with Baron Corbin. He was only shown with a supplementary pick and not aired on TV. Many people were disappointed that NXT did not participate in the draft like ECW had done in earlier drafts, but instead they just had their superstars get poached and go to the main roster with no compensation back. They're just losing superstars. So we're going to do three things here. First, we are televising every single pick. Everyone's name is going to show up on that board, and everyone, well, 99% of everyone at least, is going to get something said about them on the air. Now, you might hear 5 or 10 seconds about everyone, so we'll see if we can up that during these segments. Secondly, we will announce the number of NXT stars that will be eligible for the draft before it begins each night, but not the names, to keep that a surprise, and so we can still go to the Performance Center to see these reactions. Now, we did see in one prior draft where they did exactly that with announcing the number of NXT picks. So we're going to bring that back. I wish that was an original idea, but we liked it and we're bringing it back. This is necessary because the number of picks and the time between picks on our show will be set in advance of the draft. And thirdly, for every NXT star selected, a current main roster star will then be selected by NXT. So it's almost like an immediate trade. So under this new rule, the NXT GM may select any wrestler from that brand that selected the NXT star that was picked after the NXT star. So you'll see that in our upcoming draft. But let's say Carmelo Hayes is picked in the first round with the third pick. So the NXT GM would be allowed to pick any SmackDown superstar that was selected after Carmelo Hayes. So you're going to see here that you might not want to reach and pick these NXT superstars, or you could have a really good main roster superstar heading to NXT. Maybe that's what you want. Who knows? Becky Lynch had a great run as NXT Women's Champion last year, so we can do it. Why not? In addition, we have a couple side rules that go along with this. The main roster brands must leave enough main roster stars available to be selected by NXT at the end of the draft. So you can't just make your NXT picks your last 3 picks of the draft. And secondly, we need to set a rule that the demoted main roster stars cannot be called back up until the Royal Rumble, which is about 2 months after Survivor Series. So that's a reasonable time for them to stay in NXT before getting called back up. Our next issue, oh man, those shots of the war rooms. Oh, all right, we're going to go over that here really quickly, so let's take a look at this. You can see here that Michelle McCool and Tori Wilson were making picks in the second round of the draft on night 1. So Raw selected with the 6th overall pick and second pick of the second round, Braun Breaker, who had just been called up to the main roster and seemingly a month long or more segments where all he did was talk to the Raw and SmackDown general managers to see which brand he was going to sign a contract with. So after all of that, he signed with SmackDown, and then just a short while later, he was immediately shipped off to Raw. This was all for nothing. It was terrible. But that's not our point in this particular moment. What we want to talk about is what happened with the cameras. So they just announced that Breakker had been selected to Raw. So first we have the Raw War Room looking really happy. They're here. There they are. You can see that they have all of the picks before that have been taken. But this doesn't make a lot of sense already. Look at their whiteboard. You can see the 4 first-round picks are there. That's perfectly fine. But the 5th pick, Randy Orton, which was just said about 15 seconds earlier, is on the board, but not the Braun Breakker pick, which they just made, and also not the 2 other upcoming picks, because Michelle and Tori have cards that already say all 4 of them on their list, so both Raw and SmackDown already know that these 4 picks have been made. So why are we cutting to this shot live that they were very pumped at this moment and seemingly didn't know what else had happened before? Where on the other hand, then right after that, we cut to SmackDown's War Room, and they're just immediately looking really dejected, which I understand. They had just fought tooth and nail for Braun Breakker for a month or 2, and I just lost him after a mere few matches on the blue brand. But look at their whiteboard. They're just putting Braun up there on the board right now, like they didn't already know that he had been swooped out from under them, since they've already submitted their next pick. So this really just doesn't make any sense at all. Wow. Yeah, let's make it look realistic, guys. Let's try this a little bit harder. So with this new format, what we have now, the opposing brand's War Room will not already know who has been selected when the 2 picks are announced, because the 2 and 2 alternating format has been removed. So once Braun Breakker gets picked by Raw in our version, SmackDown will actually be upset because they missed out on it. That's our big change there. Lastly, too many people stayed on the same brands. Apparently it was a really low number. I guess it was in the 30-ish% on night 1. It did get into the 40s for night 2, but people were not happy after SmackDown with how many stars got switched on brands. So maybe they even switched it up a little bit more for Monday night. So what we do here, yeah, we're just gonna make it more random, more switches, and if you want to then put them back on the other brands, let's make some trades in season. I think we can do it. Let's go, guys. Get those trades going. So here we are. We finally made it. We've been through all of our rules to make the draft better, but let's go do this. We're gonna book the shows from 2023. So first, let's set the scene. First, the background. We just had Survivor Series. It was War Games this year, but we're going to change it. So this is our 2023 Survivor Series in November, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So the champions are the same as who they were. So they will each have champion versus champion matches. But if you remember, both the women's and men's tag team champions are combined so that we only have 1 champion each. We have Priest and Balor for the men, and we have Chelsea and Piper for the women. So we will not have tag team champions as champion v champion matches. What we will have are, on the women's side, for Raw, Rhea Ripley, and for SmackDown, Io Sky. And for the men, we have for Raw, Seth Rollins, and for SmackDown, Roman Reigns. Then the Intercontinental Champion is Gunther on Raw, and the US Champion on SmackDown is Logan Paul. So, what are the outcomes here? We will have Rhea Ripley defeating Io Sky, so she will get to declare what brand to stay on. We will have Roman Reigns defeat Seth Rollins, so he will declare what brand he wants to stay on. and we will have Gunther defeat Logan Paul, so he will get to decide which brand he will stay on. Then for the Survivor Series matches, since we're changing things up, we're going to have Raw versus SmackDown matches. So whatever you remember from the War Games matches, you can throw those out. So on the women's side, the Raw participants will be Nia Jax, Becky Lynch, Zoe Stark, Shayna Baszler, and Raquel Rodriguez will be announced as the 5th participant, but she just goes out with an injury that we didn't know about. So at the last second, Chelsea Green is going to replace Raquel. Just a little bit of excitement to add in there. Somehow Chelsea will do something right and Raw will get the win over the SmackDown team that has Bayley, Asuka, Kairi Sane, Bianca Belair, and Charlotte Flair. That team is just too flammable as they have been fighting each other, so it was a really badly placed team by general manager Nick Aldis. They just could not keep it together. So Raw will get the first pick on night 1 for the women. For night 2, the Raw team will be Damian Priest, Finn Balor, Drew McIntyre, Cody Rhodes, and Sami Zayn. For SmackDown, it will be LA Knight, Kevin Owens, Bobby Lashley, Santos Escobar, and Carlito. But Carlito is only involved because a few weeks before, Escobar took out Rey Mysterio, who was the original member of this team. But Carlito demanded that the LWO still be represented, so he is indeed on the team. But again, this time we're going to have a backstage segment where we see Carlito be the one laying on the floor being injured and out, so he is unable to participate. So it looks like SmackDown's only going to have 4 wrestlers in the match. Spoiler alert, it was Escobar all along, but for our purposes it doesn't matter because it's a 5-on-4 match. And who would have guessed it? Just like we saw on the real War Games match, Randy Orton is going to come back from his injury and he's going to get SmackDown the win, so SmackDown will select first on night 2 of the draft. All right, so let's book the show for night 1. We're going to try to run through these really quickly. We don't want to take up too much time, but we'll see exactly what we mean. So Friday night SmackDown kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern, and we have Stephanie McMahon coming out to announce the rules of the draft and the first pick, and at 8:04, Monday Night Raw selects Becky Lynch as the number 1 overall pick. Then we of course have a segment where Becky is going to have an interview saying how excited she is to be the first pick, and there we go. So after that we will have 8 minutes in between picks, and at 8:12 we will see that Bianca Belair is the number 2 pick and Charlotte Flair is the number 3 pick at 8:12. While this is happening, the same thing that happened on that actual SmackDown is going to happen. Bianca's going to come out when Becky's done. She's going to go to the ring. Damage Control is going to come out. They will start brawling. We're going to have Shotzi and Charlotte come out to help her. And so, funny enough, as this is going on, Stephanie comes out ready to announce the pick. And she announced that it is indeed Bianca and Charlotte as the 2nd and 3rd picks. So we do have some sort of commercial break to break this up. And when we come back, we're now having Bobby Lashley versus Butch in the same match that was happening on SmackDown. And sometime during the match, we can see that Steph is back out and she announces that Nia and Bayley are the 4th and 5th picks. So remember, this just goes on. Every 8 minutes, you're going to get a pick because that's when the picks are due. So during the commercial, we have the next pick being made. Those are Damage Control's Asuka and Kairi Sane. So immediately we see when we return, Damage Control is talking backstage. Bayley is upset. She got picked right before to Raw, and Asuka and Kairi get picked to SmackDown. So we already have our first conundrum here. So, SmackDown continues as it did on the real night. At 8:36, we have our next match, which is Santos Escobar versus Joaquin Wilde. They are battling, and Jade Cargill and Raquel Rodriguez get selected to Raw. 8 minutes later, this match is still going on, and your tag team champions, Chelsea Green and Piper Niven, get drafted. Now remember, champions are excluded only if there are 2 of them. In both sets of tag teams, there's only 1 of them, so the women's tag team champions at this time, they're still eligible to get drafted. Same will go for the men on Monday Night Raw. At 8:52, we return from a commercial break. Jade Cargill just got drafted to Raw with the 8th pick. So since this is the first segment after the match is over, she comes out. She's going to say how great she's going to be on Monday Night Raw and all that fun stuff. And during her entrance, Steph comes back out and she announces the 12th and 13th picks, Zoe Stark and Shayna Baszler, another case where a tag team stays together. At 9 o'clock, we get our last Damage Control member gets selected, Doktor O'Kay. She also goes to SmackDown, and Natalya is the other pick in that round at the 15th pick. And you can see backstage here, we have Bayley again talking to Damage Control. She said, hey, guess what? I just went to the SmackDown general manager, Nick Aldis, and I talked to him, and we're going to have a trade. Don't worry, we're all going to stay together. And of course, the other members of Damage Control, based on what we know that actually happened, they are less than excited. They thought maybe they had a clean off-ramp to get Bayley away from them, but they do not. And so, up pops right after this backstage talk, we get the announcement that Raw trades Bayley and the 22nd overall pick to SmackDown for Chelsea Green and Piper Niven. So yes, we have Chelsea and Piper going to Raw, but since they are the tag team champions, they still get to float between the brands. So that leads us into our next segment that actually happened, which was Logan Paul coming out to announce a United States title tournament. And of course, the same thing happens. Kevin Owens comes out and starts saying how he's going to win this tournament, and Grayson Waller and Austin Theory are going to come out and start fighting with him. So while all of this is happening, we see the 16th and 17th picks are Tegan Nox and Shotzi going to Raw. Now, if you'll note, we had the 15th pick being Natalya and the 16th pick being Tegan. They were a tag team at the time who was doing pretty well, so we'll get more on that during Raw. So put a pin in that one. So we get to the US title tournament. We have Kevin Owens here in his match. He is against Grayson Waller in the first round, and the next pick is made. With the 18th pick, we get Xia Li, and 19th pick, we get our first NXT person getting called up. It is Tiffany Stratton. So at 9:20, after the match, we come back from commercial, and Tiffany gets to come out, and she's going to make main roster debut here and be really excited for coming to SmackDown as a surprise guest. So we're calling her up several months before she actually made her debut at the Royal Rumble, but we think she's ready. It is December, so I think she's ready a month earlier. Tiffany's going to come out and make that surprise appearance. So 4 minutes later, when we're actually ready for a pick, we have Bianca Belair coming out for her match against Kairi Sane. And the pick is Zelina Vega and Michin going to Raw. So at 9:32, we still have the match going on, and we had that announced trade earlier. So here it is. Candice LeRae is that compensation for that trade with the 22nd pick. And then SmackDown's normally scheduled picks are 23rd and 24th. And those will be Indy Hartwell and Alba Fire. 8 minutes later, we have removed a few things. So this was the main event, which was Randy Orton coming out to declare that he was signing for SmackDown. But here, we don't really get to do that. Instead, he's not announcing that he's coming back to SmackDown. He's just happy to be back, saying here he is. He's making this triumphant return after 18 months of injury. He did it on Raw as well, but he gets to do it again, and he declares that he will be a part of the draft on Monday. So that's why it's not really a show closing segment. We have to get to that here shortly, but you can see we're now into the rounds where Raw is going to get 4 picks, and SmackDown will get 2 picks. So Raw has 4 straight picks, and they take Katana Chance and Kaden Carter. And then they take 2 NXT superstars, Elektra Lopez and Ivy Nile. Elektra, of course, is going to soon join Legado del Fantasma and fight against LWO. 8 minutes later, we have the Bloodline. They're not happy that Orton's here, so they're going to come out and fight him. And LA Knight's going to come to their rescue, but SmackDown will make their 2 picks, which are Isla Dawn and Maxine Dupree. Even though Alba Fire got drafted the last time SmackDown selected, Raw was not in a hurry to pick Isla Dawn, so SmackDown still got to keep that tag team together with this pick. Lastly, 8 minutes later, we're in the final segment. As we talked about earlier, the winner of the champion versus champion match is Rhea Ripley. She comes out and she announces that she is going to not say where she's going to go. She says, I'm going to hold that selection off for Raw. I need to see where the rest of the Judgment Day ends up. So general managers, you better not mess this up on Monday night. She's going to leave us in suspense for now, but during this, we do have our final picks, which are Valhalla and Nikki Cross. For our purposes, we did leave out everyone who was injured, and we also left out B-Fab and Scarlett from the draft, as they were not really wrestling, which they continued to not wrestle, so we counted them as managers and therefore not eligible. But Valhalla had wrestled just enough, we thought that she should still be eligible, and Nikki Cross was doing that weird thing where she was just kind of staring blankly, so that's why she was the last pick. So there you have it. That's it for SmackDown. Night 1 of the draft is over, but Rhea leaves us in suspense. So let's get to Monday Night Raw. This time we have picks every 6 minutes instead of every 8 minutes because there are more men to draft, so we need to keep things moving. Here we're going to have Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley come out and make the picks. For our purposes, we're just going to put Bubba Ray in that box on the left to announce the picks, just to keep it simple and not covering up everything. But I'm not wasting my graphic time to alternate between them every single pick. So for our purposes, we're just going to have Bubba Ray. So Cody Rhodes is going to get drafted over from Raw to SmackDown with the first overall pick, which is going to set up nicely his feud with the Bloodline and Roman Reigns so that he can finish the story. So Rhodes, of course, then comes out and has his in-ring segment that he already did on the actual Raw, but we're moving it up from later in the show. It was probably near the beginning of the 3rd hour. Instead, it's going to be at the top of the show. So he's going to have his in-ring promo here. But at the same time, while he's just finishing that up, we will get Raw's first selections of the night, which will be the tag team champions, the members of the Judgment Day, Damian Priest and Finn Balor, 2nd and 3rd overall picks at 8:09. 6 minutes later, we come back from commercial. Drew McIntyre comes out after it is announced that he is in this next group, with Randy Orton being the 4th pick and Drew McIntyre being the 5th pick. So at the same time, he's going to talk a while. He's already in a feud with Sami Zayn, but at the same time, Zayn is going to get picked 6th, and together with his buddy, united once again after Owens was just traded to SmackDown, they are at least temporarily back together on Raw with the 6th and 7th picks. So while they're having this segment, we can see both the Judgment Day and the Bloodline backstage. They're going to go to the general managers. They're going to say, we don't like that other people not in the Bloodline or the Judgment Day have been picked. You guys better not mess this up. We're going to be on you if you do. So we better be the next picks. So sure enough, we come back. It's still SmackDown at 8:27. They're up. So with the 8th and 9th pick, they take Solo Sikoa and Jimmy Uso. And of course, that is during McIntyre and Zayn's actual match that we saw on Raw that night. 6 minutes later, those two are still fighting, and Raw makes its selection, and they are those Judgment Day members, Dominic Mysterio and JD McDonough. Funny how picks can happen when you're applying a little bit of pressure to make them happen. 6 minutes later, after commercial, we go to Sami. He's been injured by Drew. Jackie wants an interview with him, so we have our next picks announced right before that. They are Jey Uso and LA Knight going to SmackDown. Then we get to the next women's segment, which will be a match between Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. During this match, we have picks 14 and 15, CM Punk and Rey Mysterio. The match is still going on at 8:51, and we get SmackDown selecting Bobby Lashley and AJ Styles. After the match is over, which Nia won, we go to commercial, and picks of Santos Escobar and Ricochet get made going to Raw. So we can see Legado del Fantasma might just want to make its way to Raw now. At 9:03, CM Punk had been picked a little earlier. He did not actually appear in this Raw, but since it is a draft, he is going to make an in-ring appearance, and he's going to cut a promo here while SmackDown selects The Miz and Montez Ford. 9 minutes later, we're on the next commercial, and picks are made again during the break, and this time it's Shinsuke Nakamura and Bronson Reed. Then when we come back from commercial, we see GM Adam Pearce talking to The Miz. He says that he is not happy going to SmackDown because he wants another crack at Gunther for the Intercontinental Champion, and he puts a little pressure on to see if we can get a trade. So we'll see if that happens, but we get our next match, which is DIY versus Imperium. So during this match, we have the next picks of Austin Theory and Grayson Waller. 6 minutes later, the match is still going on, and we get Ivar and Angelo Dawkins. So it looks like the Street Profits are split up for the moment. At 9:25, the match is now over, and look at that, Bobby Lashley is now speaking to SmackDown General Manager Nick Aldis. We go to commercial at 9:27, we get our next picks, which is DIY, who did win that tag team match, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. When we get back from the commercial, 9:29, we see that we have a trade. Our first trade of the night, SmackDown trades The Miz and pick 64 to Raw for Shinsuke Nakamura and pick 61. So just maybe Miz will get another chance at Gunther. So we get ready to make our next pick. Oh, look at that. It's the Judgment Day. They're going to come out at 9:33. We get our next picks with the New Day, Kofi Kingston, and Xavier Woods. And what does the Judgment Day have to say? Rhea Ripley says, okay, great Monday Night Raw. You selected everyone from the Judgment Day. I am also going to stay on Monday Night Raw. And they are still talking in the ring when it's time for the next picks, which are Ludwig Kaiser and Giovanni Vinci of Imperium. So the Judgment Day leaves, we go to commercial, and as soon as we come back from commercial, we see that Raw trades Angelo Dawkins and pick 62 to Raw for picks 52 and 53. So yes, Bobby Lashley's intimidation works, and he gets Angelo Dawkins back on SmackDown. Next, when we come back, we have an in-ring segment for Gunther. He is now prepared to announce where he's going because Imperium just got drafted to SmackDown. He says, I am switching brands. I am leaving Raw and I am going to stay with Vinci and Kaiser. I am taking the Intercontinental title to SmackDown. Logan Paul is going to have to come to Monday Night Raw with the US title. So at 9:51, we have our next commercial, and SmackDown selects Pretty Deadly, Elton Prince, and Kit Wilson. At 9:57, we get our next announcement that Braun Breaker, our first pick from NXT, will be going to Monday Night Raw, and pick 39 will be Omos. As we head to the 10 o'clock hour starting, we're going to get our main in-ring event here for 10 o'clock. So Seth Rollins is taking Jey Uso on tonight as a friendly match. So here, instead of Breaker appearing live, you can see we're doing a little picture-in-picture while these two men come to the ring. We're going to have that special announcement at NXT. He's going to say how happy he is to be going to the main roster on Monday Night Raw. So we do have that World Heavyweight Championship match between Rollins and Jey Uso going on. Jey realizes this is his only chance to stay on Raw, so he must win this match tonight or else he's going to be headed to SmackDown. So during the match, we have Carmelo Hayes, our next NXT main roster call-up. He is going to SmackDown, and also Ridge Holland is selected 41st. The match continues for our next picks. Here we are, we're switching formats. We have Raw now making 4 straight selections, and they select Butch, which is officially breaking him up from Ridge Holland and the Brawling Brutes. 43rd is the returning R-Truth, who just showed up at Survivor Series. And then we have the LWO's Carlito and Dragon Lee. 6 minutes later, the match is still going on, and we have SmackDown selecting Otis and Akira Tozawa. So at this point, we have all of the Alpha Academy except for Chad Gable going to SmackDown, while Gable stays on Raw. 6 minutes later, we've moved on to the next match, and it is our #1 contenders match for the Women's Tag Team Championships. It's between Carter and Chance and Natalya and Tegan Nox. As we noted on night 1, Natalya and Tegan are being split up, so they need to win the Tag Team Championships in order to stay together. Otherwise, they will be going to opposite brands here. So this is their one chance to earn the #1 contendership again and then take the titles from Chelsea and Piper. So while this match is going on, we have the next 4 picks: Joaquin Wilde and Cruz del Toro of Legado del Fantasma, and Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows from the OC. Match is still going on 6 minutes later, so Raw, with their picks that they acquired from SmackDown earlier, they select Angel and Humberto, which keeps them now with Santos Escobar for Legado del Fantasma. Match is over, and we're going to change the results, and Tegan and Natalya are going to win. So we'll see if they can win those tag team champions. But for now, we're going to commercial. Raw's next 4 picks are the NXT call-ups Julius Creed and Brutus Creed, as well as Indishares, Veer, and Sangha. When we get back, we have our next match. Look at that. The Creeds are now making their debut. While they actually debuted earlier, we have held them back. So they are making a surprise first appearance and a surprise first match on Raw here. And they are taking on the Judgment Day's McDonough and Dominic Mysterio. At this time during the match, SmackDown selects Jinder Mahal, breaking him up from Indusher, and Dexter Lumis. 6 minutes later, we have just one selection here for Raw due to the trade, and it is Cedric Alexander. Now we finally get to our final segment. It is Roman Reigns making a rare appearance, well, a rare appearance in general, but in this case a rare appearance on Raw, and he is going to announce that because the Judgment Day has all been properly selected on SmackDown, he will indeed stay on SmackDown. During this, Cameron Grimes and Apollo Crews are selected for SmackDown. Roman continues here, and even though it's not going to be announced, we're on our very last picks. Tyler Bate, one final NXT call-up, is the 63rd pick, and Ashanti, the Adonis, with the 64 pick, stay on Raw. And Seth Rollins shows up to beef with Reigns, even though he lost to Reigns at Survivor Series, and just popping up on the screen is Zion Quinn going to SmackDown. And while Roman still keeps talking, we have our final pick of Odyssey Jones going to Raw. And that is how night 2 of the draft concludes. So the post-draft fallout on Raw. We have here McIntyre becomes more irate because everyone he hates is still on Raw. He refuses to wrestle on SmackDown and forces a trade back to Raw after just a few weeks. Amazingly, yet again, Kevin Owens is traded back to SmackDown as compensation. Sami Zayn, who was injured during the draft, he becomes even more upset at McIntyre, and these two have an even bigger feud because Zayn is mad that his friend got traded twice away from him so recently. Secondly, The Miz is upset that he asked for a trade to stay on Raw and fight Gunther, and then Gunther just managed to avoid him and go to SmackDown anyways. Logan Paul, who has both befriended and then challenged and fought The Miz, laughs at him and refuses to give him a title shot. Fortunately for The Miz, he soon joins with Awesome Truth, and everything goes great from there for him. Lastly, Natalya and Tegan, we saw that they were dejected from being separated in the draft. They realized that they had to win the tag titles to stay together. They did beat Carter and Chance on night 2, but as we see, they lost the next week to Chelsea and Piper. So their tag team ends. On the SmackDown side, Jay opens up that next SmackDown saying that he will do his best to stay away from the bloodline. However, he barely finishes saying that when Sikoa and Brother Jimmy come in and take him out, injuring him. Jay is out until he makes a triumphant return at the Royal Rumble as entrant number 1, just as he did. And of course, Jimmy is entrant number 2. This takes us all the way to WrestleMania to really and officially have a much better storyline to get them to battle each other at WrestleMania. Of course, while Jay is out, the Bloodline turns their attention to Rhodes, vowing to stop him from finishing the story. Somehow, against all odds, he does indeed win the Royal Rumble and gets that title shot against Roman Reigns. How The Rock becomes involved, well, we're gonna have to figure that out later. That's not our challenge today. On SmackDown, the Alpha Academy is lost without their Master Gable, and they get squashed in mere seconds throughout the month of December. Then in their final match of the year, this time as a tag team, Otis and Tozawa are about to lose again when Gable shows up, runs down the ramp, and coaches them to a win. He was just traded for Jinder Mahal, fortunately in time for The Rock to destroy him on the first Raw of the new year. But Gable and the Alpha Academy are rejoined together, and we'll see how things work out for them. I know they're not going very well right now for real, but under this scenario, maybe things will go a little bit differently. And let's talk about our NXT selections. Remember, the rule is that after an NXT superstar is selected by either main roster brand, that anyone selected after that NXT superstar may be selected to go down to NXT. In this case, those folks are Indy Hartwell for Tiffany Stratton, Valhalla for Elektra Lopez, and Nikki Cross for Ivy Nile. On the men's side, it's Omos from Braun Breaker, Ridge Holland from Carmelo Hayes, Veer from Julius Creed, Sangha from Brutus Creed, and Odyssey Jones from Tyler Bate. In this scenario, Omos is going to refuse to go to NXT. He is just going to show up at the Royal Rumble in his first allowed appearance back on the main roster. And of course, he and Braun Breaker are going to have a great stare down and battle each other in the Royal Rumble, just like they did for real. So there you have it. Let's show you the full results of the draft, and you can see it's color-coded. First on the women, the Raw selections are on the left. SmackDown selections are on the right. They're color-coded, but any trades we have, you can see which brand that they flip to by that color. And the NXT demotions are shown in yellow. Then here is the men's side. Same deal. We had 2 trades on this night instead of 1 on the women's side. And again, the NXT picks are in yellow. So there you have it. You can see here on the second page in particular, you can see that the Raw side has 2 selections per every 1 on the SmackDown side. But the trades have certainly changed things around near the end of the draft. So there you have it, Zoo Crew. We've just made the WWE Draft a lot better and a lot more exciting, and let's hope that throughout the year that they will follow through and have a bunch of trades, at least after WrestleMania, to shake things up even more. So a big shout out to Doktor O'Kay for all his work on this project. I know things have been a little bit freaky the last couple of weeks, but I think we're back on the right track. So for Doktor O'Kay, I want to thank you for joining the SportsZu. It's no Monday Night Raw, but this movie really is pretty great. Hey, I'm never as difficult as Anna, right? Yeah, never. Doc, you burn him again.